Hey y'all, Kenny here. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of my Dreadnought guitar build. I'll show you what I've done so far. I have mated my end joints and I have those ready for glue. I have this tape in place to help prevent cracks in the sides while I'm working with it. I've profiled the sides in the bandsaw. I use masking tape along this saw line as well to help keep the saw from pulling chips out of my sides. A trick I learned a long time ago that helps with that as well is to use a support board in your saw when you're sawing thin material. I have my neck and tail block made. I make those from the leftover wood from that large neck block that I showed you in part 1. I want the grain on my neck and tail block to run with the grain on the sides. This block's only 3 inches, so it's not tall enough. So I have to glue up a block to get the correct height. I use a tenon joint to install my neck, and I route that joint using a jig. I'll show you that jig when I route the tenon in my neck. So the next thing I'm going to do is get my sides positioned back in the form. I'll do a dry clamp. When I get my parts into position, I'll use this wire drill to drill some locator holes, and I'll use pins to keep my parts in position once I get the glue on them. I'm using Titebond original glue for all the internal parts. Any part that may need to be removed for repairs, I use white glue, like the top, the back, the neck, and the fretboard. This is my rim with the neck and tail block glued in, as well as the kerfing for the top. I have radiused my back. Of course, you don't want a flat surface on the back of your guitar. To accomplish that, I use this radiused disc that I made with sandpaper attached, which obviously needs to be replaced. I have this table with a spindle, which is nothing more than a 1/2 inch bolt. I mark all my surfaces with chalk so I can observe my progress. And I slip a sanding disc down on my rim. And I sand until I have contact on all the surfaces. Now, when I built my first few guitars, I did all this by hand. I arched the braces and I fit these blocks to the back, which was really time consuming. Every jig that I build makes the next build easier. In fact, on my first few guitars, I thicknessed my back and sides using a block plane and a hand sander. This was my resource for my first build, the book by Irving Sloan, Steel String Guitar Construction. It's just chock full of tips on how to do things without spending a fortune on tools, and that's where I got a lot of my ideas from. So next I'm going to install the kerfing for the back. I use clothespins as clamps, and I'll install that kerfing a little high because it needs to be radiused as well. Of course, then I'll use my disc to sand the radius in it. I have kerfed the back and radiused that kerfing. I've installed these reinforcement strips along the sides. All I really lack is to inlay an end graft here at the tail block. I keep the interior clean as I work. Clean up all the glue squeeze. When I'm finished, before I close the box, I'll sand the interior and do a final inspection. Because I want the interior of my guitar to look as clean as the exterior. Let you have a look at my rosette. I made it from some of the wood from the back. I added these accents, black, white, black. I like a natural look. So I've salvaged these 2 pieces of wood from the sides that I'm going to use for purfling, and I'll put this same black white accent on it as well. This is the cutter that I use. I made this for my first guitar build. It's a bit crude, but it works. self-explanatory. It's just a circle cutter. I adjust for diameter here, and I can adjust the depth of the cutter. I made the cutter out of some sort of hardened steel that I really can't even identify now. I have this spindle. This is bolted to my top. I set my diameter and I make my cut. Now for the inside, then I make my outside cut. Then I made multiple passes on the interior and used a chisel to remove the excess wood. So I'll set this thing up, cut my sound hole out, and I'll be ready to brace my top. I have my major braces made. These are the 4 for the back. You can see the radius in the brace. I made this jig to help make that easier. I just clamp my wood in and trace it, cut it in the bandsaw, clamp it back in, run it through the router, gets my outside radius. And I set it on this side on the stops, trace it, cut it, and route it. This is my X brace and my neck support brace. I use a little reinforcing strip at the joint on my X brace, something that I've always done. My next step will be to inlet these braces into the rim. Once I fit those, I place my top on the guitar, center it up, then I use this little wire drill bit again and a pin on each corner to keep these braces in alignment while I glue them up. When they're glued onto the top, then this will just pop right onto the rim and fit nicely. My top is braced, but I thought I would show you how I do that. I have this deck built from some old plywood, and I'm using electrical conduit for uprights. My clamps are some old aluminum arrows from back in the day when I shot the bows with the training wheels, and I've repurposed them as my go bars. This is my brace top. There are a lot of different ways you could brace a guitar top, and I'm not going to get into that, but this is my preferred method. It's a modified double X brace. This top is lightly braced. I also taper the soundboard. It is thinner along the outer edge than it is in the center. Now I install my top first for 2 reasons. One, I can clean up the glue squeeze. And then when I install my back, I can work through the sound hole and clean the interior of the instrument. But mainly because I can test the stiffness of my whole system, and if I need to make adjustments to my bracing, I can to get the most out of my guitar. Here's my roughed in neck. I have the tendon cut. I told you I would show you this jig. I have a template made and I just clamp the neck in. I have a couple holes that I can sight the center and clamp this down. And I use a router bit, pattern bit, 1/2 inch to do that. And I also have a template for a slot that fits into my jig. Originally I did all this by hand. It's still possible to do that. This just speeds up the process. I'll let you have a look at my glue rig before I take the guitar out. These are just wooden spools that I made with a hole saw. I have some 1/4 inch threaded rod with wing nuts, spools on the back side that are hooked to the rim. And I use a couple large clamps at my neck and tail block. Here we are out of the glue clamps, and I've done my final tuning on the top. Some luthiers use a high-tech approach to tune their tops, but I still do it the traditional way, and that is based on what I feel and what I hear. I'm trying to find a balance between strength and resonance, and basically I'm removing any wood from the interior of this guitar that is not absolutely necessary. I can test the strength of my top with my thumb. Of course, the tendency is to overbuild. The good news is you can always lighten your braces by working through the sound hole after the instrument's completed. Of course, it's much easier if you get it right to begin with. I'll let you hear the top. I don't know if you hear what I hear, but I hear magic. This is going to be a good one, I guarantee you. Next, I'm going to brace my back. I have this template I made with all my brace positions drawn out, both for the top and the back. I just centered it up on my rim, mark my brace positions. I use a fine cut saw to make my outside cuts. Then I use the Dremel tool on a router base to remove the wood from the center. Again, I use my wire drill bits and pins to hold these braces in position as I glue them up so that when it's dry, it'll fit perfectly on this rim. I bought this blueprint for my first build 20 years ago, and I have preserved it, and I still refer to it occasionally. I highly recommend a good blueprint if you're going to build your first guitar. I have my back braced. I do the glue up in my radius dish. This reinforcement strip is one continuous piece. I've cut tunnels in my bracing to accommodate that strip. I did this for the first time on my last build, and I actually think it's easier than fitting these pieces individually between the braces. Besides that, I just think it looks neat. I really don't see where it compromises the strength of the back at all. Got my back glued on. I think I'll conclude part 2 of my video at this point. When I return for part 3, I'll bind this box and get it ready to finish. I need to complete my neck, make a truss rod, make a fretboard and a bridge. So I hope you'll join me for that as well. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.